Hello YouTube. As promised, the wait wasn't going to be that long for the next video. Although if you watched my review of Tremors 4 with Nick, I said that it would probably be sometime this weekend or this past weekend, but as it turns out, some relatives are moving out again, so there was a bit of a distraction, but here I am. This video probably isn't going to be as long as the first couple because I have to admit that I am not a major Trekkie, but a good chunk of these movies were on Pluto TV on demand this past month, and I've been watching a few of them. And I do like the Star Trek movies. I've always said that Star Trek is a TV franchise, and if you want to get the most context out of the franchise, you probably need to watch the shows, which I have tried to dabble in and haven't got too far. But yeah, I still like these movies, and I think to a degree they stand on their own. But again, perhaps context isn't the right word, but if you want to get the most bang for your buck, the most entertainment value and worth out of these, I think the shows will probably help you in that. First up, we have Star Trek the Motion Picture, the Director's Edition. Obviously the very first Trek movie. And y'all will probably notice that these cases are a lot more thicker than your usual DVD case. They're almost like VHS slips and sleeves. But yeah, anyway, this was one of the ones that was streaming on Pluto. And right before it went off, it did say it was the director's edition, but from what I've heard, the only HD version of this movie that's available, the only one that's on Blu-ray, is the theatrical version, which was considered by the director to be a work print pretty much at the time, and not really the final version that he wanted to have released. This was originally going to be Star Trek Phase 2, a second TV series, but once Star Wars went big in '77, Paramount was wondering, what do we own that can cash in, maybe compete with Star Wars, and they found Trek. As it turns out, this isn't really anything like the original Star Wars, nor does it need to be. But they were definitely aspiring for a 2001 A Space Odyssey kind of feel with this. Very highfalutin science fiction, I guess you'd say. Whenever I got this, which was almost 10 years ago in 2012, I had a real big sudden interest in wanting to watch all the Trek movies, and I got all these DVDs. Whenever I first watched this, it was very, very taxing, I guess I'll say. The pacing did not work for me. As it turns out, though, some 10 years later, almost 10 years later, I think I'm finally grooving with this movie, and I just can say I like it. Of course, I don't think it was actually the director's edition that was streaming on Pluto, so I guess the version I like is the theatrical, but I do want to give this another watch because I do like it now. And even though it goes against canon, I always kind of thought it would have been cool if this had been the origin of the Borg race and species from Star Trek The Next Generation, because there's something that happens in here, which for those who have never seen it, I'll let you watch it to find out. There's something that happens in here that, if you're paying attention, makes you think, huh, this could be that, even if it isn't canonically actually that. I'll also say that 1979 seemed to be the last year where they had some quote-unquote slow burn type movies, whether they were sci-fi or horror films. The horror film that comes to mind from the same year is Werner Herzog's Nosferatu remake, which I really couldn't stand the German version of that, but thankfully I watched the English language version and liked it a lot better. And also Alien came out this year and is also another slow burn, though that never bothered me as much as Trek or Nosferatu did. So, you know, over time, though, it seems like the pacing has grown on me, or it doesn't bother me as much. I am older after all. And one final note, the Star Trek Beyond poster, one of the Kelvin Timeline movies, which we're going to get into at the end of this video. The poster for Star Trek Beyond, the third one of those, makes a tribute to this poster. You have Spock in the green and blue there, Kirk in the red, and Lieutenant Ilia in the yellow. Moving right along, we have the next three movies, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. These are pretty much the Star Trek equivalent of the original Star Wars trilogy. It's an overarching story. Probably another good example to compare to is Mothra vs. Godzilla, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and Invasion of Astro Monster, or better titled Monster Zero. That's another overarching trilogy which you can compare to this. And Wrath of Khan is obviously probably the most beloved or most critically acclaimed and well received of the movies, and next to 4. But this was kind of a sort of reboot for the movie series after the first film wasn't exactly everybody's cup of tea. As you can see, it's a little bit thinner than the other cases. Also the director's edition, which has a wonderful commentary by Nicholas Meyer on here. He said something about films and the fact that when you watch a movie you can usually tell the year it was made by the look of it, by the look of the photography or the costumes or whatnot. You can tell what year a film was made by that, and I was happy to hear somebody say that because it's a sentiment that I also share. And yeah, so the series got back on track with Wrath of Khan. Continue with Search for Spock. This is probably the most damaged of the DVDs I got. You can probably, if you can look past the glare, you can probably see a bunch of dents and whatnot. It's really bad on the back. There's a chunk missing out of the plastic there. There you can see. This is actually my personal favorite of the Trek films. I love the look of the film. I love the emotion of the movie. It's a very emotional film, probably the most emotional Trek film by far. Just a good time. Also, you can't beat Christopher Lloyd as Krug, the Klingon commander, one of the best villains of the series. And then I was almost ready to write this one off, but here's The Voyage Home, the fish out of water, Back to the Future cash-in, the first time travel movie in the Trek series, and also ends this particular arc. A good movie, very funny, and I did not remember up until now that there was no pictures on the back. But regardless, this is one of those movies where they kind of allow themselves to make fun of themselves and poke fun at the nature of the series by having them travel back to the 80s. But, yeah, that ended that arc. And both this and The Search for Spock were directed by Leonard Nimoy, Spock himself. And then next up we have the last two movies featuring the original series cast, which is the crew under Captain Kirk, played by William Shatner, of course. William Shatner, speaking of Shatner, he saw that Leonard Nimoy was having fun directing the other two Trek films, and not to be one-upped, he decided to step into the director's chair. Unfortunately, the legacy of The Final Frontier, Star Trek V, is not that great for Mr. Shatner. 1989 was a pretty busy year for films. Pretty much if you weren't Batman 89, you underperformed in some way. That doesn't mean that there weren't some great movies made at this time or that year. And actually, Trek V is probably my second favorite, believe it or not, of the Trek films. It has some problems. Mr. Shatner's dry sense of humor and dipping into camp isn't everybody's cup of tea. And also, unfortunately, the effects were not up to par for this one. They almost border on Superman 4 levels of bad, but the movie itself as a whole, I think, is a lot better than Superman 4, even though I like that film as well. I'm a devil's advocate for it. Jerry Goldsmith, who did the score for the motion picture, returned. And Goldsmith's score for Trek. The movies, and then the Next Generation, then the Next Generation movies, has always hit me in an emotional way, much more so than the Star Wars theme. Even though I consider myself more of a Star Wars guy, the Trek theme definitely hits me a lot stronger than Star Wars ever has, surprisingly enough. And last but certainly not least is Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. The Undiscovered Country being in reference to the future itself, which is a very scary thing for human beings in general, and it applies even in a sci-fi setting. This is directed by Nicholas Meyer as well, who also did The Wrath of Khan, #2, and also has another great commentary, and also does a fabulous job finishing out the original crew's movie run. This is a great sign-off. The movie looks a little bit cheaper than the previous 5, although 5 started to show some cheapness due to some budget issues and special effects not being up to par because all the companies were busy working on the various films that came out in '89. Trek 6 downsized a little bit in the budget department, but still looks pretty great, and what's most impressive about this movie is the acting and the story itself. So yeah, the great finishing out for the original crew. And next up we have the Next Generation movies. Star Trek Generations, Part 7. Star Trek First Contact, Part 8, and also probably the most beloved of the TNG Next Generation movies. Star Trek 9, Insurrection, and then Star Trek Nemesis, the 10th and final film in that original run of original and Next Generation movies. Generations is also a pretty emotional piece. It's a transition from the original crew to the Next Generation crew for movies. Kirk and Picard get to share some screen time. Malcolm McDowell is also in this flick as a physicist. So there you go. Also of note is the fact that Data, who is the Next Generation equivalent of Spock, he's an android, so he gets a motion chip during the course of this movie. And it's a very interesting arc that he goes on. Which arguably continues with First Contact, probably one of the most popular Trek movies overall, and certainly the most popular of this run. Features the Borg, the famous villains of the Next Generation series, and successors to the Klingons, more or less. Probably the one that I have some memories of as a kid, because this came out in '96, whenever I was 5. Also, we get some more development for Data as he continues on his ever-growing journey to be more human. Star Trek Insurrection, which looks fairly beat up. There's also some air bubbles in here, which whenever I got all these, it seems like they had been sitting in a warehouse for a good while before they were sent to me. The Star Trek 4 DVD, for one thing, is a dual French and English release, so it probably came from Canada. Yeah, Insurrection gets picked on a whole lot, but the truth of the matter is that this run of movies has 2 films, Generations and Insurrection, which are basically TV episode type stories, but with a movie budget. I like them, but they're also not quite cinematic. First Contact, though, is very cinematic. And then Nemesis, which I guess it goes to show that I'm not a hardcore Trekkie, because I don't understand why people dislike this flick so much. Some people say it's kind of a transition into the Kelvin J.J. Abrams films, but I mean, I'll explain here in a minute why I don't think that's a bad thing. I've always liked this. Features Tom Hardy as a clone, spoiler alert, of Picard. So basically Tom Hardy is playing a younger version of Patrick Stewart in this. Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard. And what's interesting is that Tom was in a movie with Chris Pine, who would later go on to play young Captain Kirk in the Kelvin Timeline films, and he and Tom were in a movie with Reese Witherspoon. I think it was called This Means War. So technically, the young version of Kirk and Picard have been in a movie together. So there's that. And I do believe this was the last movie that Jerry Goldsmith did the score for. It was a very beautiful swan song. Very poetic, considering I think it's one of his best themes that he ever did. So yeah, those are the Next Generation movies. Not trying to rush through them, but at the same time, not a whole lot to say about them as a whole. These are the standouts. I think Generations has some good emotion to it. These two tend to get ragged on for feeling like TV episodes. And real quick, before we wrap up with the most recent films, of which I only have 2 of them, I'm going to give my recommendations for the 8 movies that I think form 2 really nice arcs. First up, we have the motion picture, number 1, Final Frontier, number 5, Generations, number 7, and First Contact, number 8. I recommend these as a sequence that you should follow because the motion picture basically is about a entity trying to find its place in the universe, basically a search for the creator, the search for God. And then the Final Frontier literally is supposed to be for the search for God. That is what is considered the Final Frontier. Whether or not they actually meet God, you'll have to watch the movie to find out. And then Generations, I think, has a very interesting take on the concept of heaven. There's this dimension, this thing called the Nexus, which the Malcolm McDowell physicist character is trying to recreate so that he can return to it and basically live in what he considers his personal bliss for all eternity. And that's also something that factors into the other characters in the film. And then First Contact is the one movie with the Borg. And if you remember what I said about the motion picture, my head canon, even if it's not actual canon, is that we witness the origin of the Borg in that, and then we actually get to see the Borg in the First Contact movie. So yeah, these basically all have a creator creation theme to them. So that's why I'm recommending those 4. And here are the other 4 that I would recommend. As I said earlier, these 3 are basically a trilogy, basically the companion piece to the Star Wars trilogy, original trilogy. But if you want to even it out, 6, The Undiscovered Country, rounds it out very nice. These all flow into each other with similar themes that build on from one another. 2 Nicholas Meyer films, and then 2 Leonard Nimoy directed films. So yeah, these probably flow the best. I think most Trek fans, Trekkies, would probably agree with me on this one, maybe more so than the other recommendation I make for a arc that you should follow. But yeah, there's that. And finally, ladies and gents, we have my 2 Kelvin film DVDs. This is the slipcover for this one. Star Trek 2009. Directed by Mr. J.J. Abrams. And for those who are wondering why this is called the Kelvin Timeline, there's Spock behind the words, and Kirk there too. And there they are without the words in front of them. This is called the Kelvin Timeline because Captain Kirk's dad, James Kirk's dad, George Kirk, played by Chris Hemsworth, Thor himself, is the captain of the USS Kelvin, and it gets attacked at the start of this movie and creates a whole new timeline, which is why the series is called the Kelvin Timeline, because in the original films, Kirk's dad was still alive, and spoiler alert, Spock's mom was still alive too. So that's what changes, and then a whole new sequence of events arises, and that's why it's basically the excuse they came up with to acknowledge regular canon of the original series and then start and do their own thing, which is interesting. It's not a straight up full-on reboot, but it tries to work within the context of the universe. Here's Into Darkness, the second Abrams film, second Kelvin Timeline film. I actually haven't watched this DVD yet, and I got it a while back. to check it out. Although I have a feeling I'll probably watch the Blu-ray that I pick up before I watch the DVD, but we'll see what happens. And of course, I'm missing the third film from about 5 years ago now, 2016 Star Trek Beyond, which is currently the last film in the Kelvin Timeline. And I was referencing how the poster for the motion picture was paid homage to with the poster for Beyond. But yeah, I'm probably going to pick that one up at some point. And also to round out this particular set of Star Trek films, I also think the movie Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets is actually a movie that probably complements the Kelvin films pretty good. And just to follow up what I was saying whenever I was talking about Nemesis a little bit ago, I don't get that. I don't find it insulting that that was a transition into this style of Trek film, because the 2009 film is actually what got me interested in the franchise. I saw this and liked it a whole lot, and then I decided that I wanted to check the rest out, and the rest is history. So even though they are a rebooted, refreshed variation on the Trek franchise, I think if it brings people to it, I mean, it's done its job, at least in my opinion. So yes, ladies and gents on YouTube or wherever you're watching this, that'll about do it for this video. I'm hoping that I will gradually become a bigger Trekkie, though Star Wars will probably be always a bit more of my jam, but I am growing much more fonder of the Trek films as time goes on. And yeah, if you like this video, like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one. I'm not going to give a specific date like I have been with the reviews with Nick, because, you know, I may not meet that date. So whenever the next video comes along, it will come along. I'm probably going to cover my Power Rangers DVD collection, seeing as how that recently left Netflix as of Monday. So yeah, we'll see y'all then. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like the video. Toodles.